Pastor Manders is presumably a Lutheran pastor in Norway, important in this small community where the play takes place. He's not just a religious figure, but he's also involved in people's business affairs and in, I think, largely keeping order in the small town. And it seems as though he's also influential in more than just this one place. He's also a man who has a certain set of ideas that he really is committed to and really lives strongly by. Well, I think that in this play, first of all, I'll give you the answer. I don't think he is. I thought so too when I first read the play. And of course, I'm not just saying that as an actor who wants to take his character's side, although I am that. But also, I think that the real antagonist of the play is an antagonist to both Pastor Manders and Mrs. Alving, and that's just society in general. I mean, I think that these are two people who are both failing to survive for whatever reason in a certain period in time when things are changing. I mean, it's the end of the 19th century, and so there are so many influences from abroad, so many things influencing Ibsen when he wrote this. Manders takes the approach that in order to live a good life, you have to follow the rules to the letter, regardless of how in a certain case the rules might not be as helpful as they ought to be. You know, like if you have a horrible husband who cheats on you and has orgies in your house while you sit in the kitchen, which is actually what is said to have happened in the play when Alving and her husband lived together, Pastor Manders would still say that she has to try to convince her husband to turn around rather than get divorced or leave him. And Mrs. Alving is stuck in this place where her son has left her, her husband, who she didn't like, died, and she's just trying to make the best of a bad situation, and she's using whatever ideas are available to her. But whereas Mrs. Alving is open-minded and she's constrained by her role as a woman in a stringent society, Pastor Manders makes the choice to be constrained. And I think the reason he makes that choice is because he genuinely believes that he's doing the right thing by God. And I think that if you believe in God, and you believe that a higher power has dominion over everything in the world, and that the Bible is like the truth of the absolute otherworldly place, then you want to do exactly what he says, and you don't want to deviate from it in any way. And every time that you think you might want to, you just remind yourself that you don't know as well as God does. And I think that's where Pastor Manders is coming from with his morality. And I think it's also that he can't afford to seem as though he has the wrong intentions because of how important he is to the community. That he can make mistakes, but he has to make sure that his intentions are always seen as benevolent, because otherwise he could lose his position that he values so much. So it's really long-winded, but yeah, that's where I think the antagonist is the circumstances that these people find themselves in, and not any one character. I think that Pastor Manders is probably the most different character than me that I've ever played, even in scene work. So I'm not even talking about roles that I've had where I've had to see them to fruition. And so I had to really imagine what it would be like to be a guy who is so rigid about morality and institutionalism, which are things that I personally don't like. And I think what it came down to for me, or my way in, was just to reflect on the amount of responsibility that he has, to reflect on how many people rely on him, and how much the work that he does for the community really does affect the survival of the community and the flourishing of it. And I think that I started to have a lot of sympathy for him because he's just a person like anybody else. And for him to have the amount of willpower that he's able to stick to his morals, even when it's so difficult and so many people rely on him, you have to respect that. I mean, he really does his best, and I think that people are drawn to him because of that. He does fight with himself and win a lot, in order to be the person that he thinks he has to be. If we're talking about current events, there's political leaders in certain countries that don't really live by any moral code and don't really have anything that kind of makes them feel that they owe something to other people. There's a lot of narcissism. And so if anything, Pastor Manders is trying not to be a narcissist. He doesn't succeed usually, but everything he's doing, he hopes, is for the benefit of other people. And you have to respect that even if you don't agree with the ideas themselves. That's where I came from it. I came from it first from a place of respect for him as another person who's not me and not like me, and then from a place of imagining what it would be like if I had that amount of responsibility and how would I handle it. What right do we as human beings have to seek happiness in this life? We have simply to do our duty, and your duty was to the man whom you respected and whom you were bound to by the holiest ties. But particularly the first part, what right do we as human beings have to happiness in this life? I think is really interesting. It's about how we live our lives. He's so opposed to hedonism, which is just what I was talking about before. He's so opposed to doing things for the sake of immediate pleasure, that he thinks that everything one does should be for the benefit of a greater good or for a future reward that is more valuable. And I think that we human beings, we all try to. I mean, I'm not a student anymore, but I was a student for a long time, and a lot of you are students, and you know what it's like to have to force yourself to study rather than do what you want to do, and how often we fail at that. And I think that that's a battle that we fight all our lives, to reject what feels good in the moment in order to do something more valuable. And I think that's how that quote has always been the real key for me in terms of Manders' morality. And I also it was my hardest won victory at Helen, the victory against myself, because that's a moment where Manders admits that it was hard for him to reject love at a point in his life. He's telling Mrs. Alving that there was a time in his life when he rejected love. And it goes back to the other quote that I was talking about, where he chose to do that so that he could do the right thing. And I think that there's a lot to be respected in that. Try to be yourself. I think that authenticity is extremely important. This thing Stanislavski said about how the person you really are is like a million times more interesting than any person you could pretend to be. And I think that a lot of actors get caught up in trying to be something. I think that a lot of us are insecure anyway, and that's why we start to act in the first place. I know it's why I did. And we want to kind of escape ourselves by playing different characters, but the more you do it, the more you realize how valuable it is to just do what comes natural, in combination with your preparation. And especially in an audition, right? I mean, more than anything, they're looking for a real human being, not necessarily a cookie-cutter version of what they think they might want. Like, I've auditioned people before for things, and I know that the people I've chosen and that I've been really happy about have always been people that did things that I never thought to want, that they just did because they were naturally who they were. Well, first of all, it would probably be the word that, other than the and, the word that he uses the most is duty. I think that that's been a through line in everything that I've spoken about with regards to Pastor Manders is duty. And actually that still ties into the preparation process. This is the largest character I've ever played. And he has 60 pages of lines. And first and foremost, you have to do your duty to learn those lines before you can do anything else, because of the fact of it. And with a month of rehearsal, it's really concentrated. So that's number one is duty for Manders and duty for the process. Number two is the joy of life. He talks about how Alving, the father, overflowed with the joy of life. And I think that Manders' joy comes from responsibility. And I think what I learned from this process, or what I got back from this process, working with all the wonderful people I'm working with, especially Jordy, but really everybody involved in the production, is finding the joy of acting again, which I had lost for a little while actually, because I was working on material that I wasn't passionate about. And so to work on Ibsen, who's some of the best writing in the world, dive deep, you find that sort of meaningful joy that I think Manders is searching for too. That joy that comes from something deeper than just surface level pleasure. Classic would be the last one. And I mean it in the sense of things that are timeless. That there are certain themes in this play that still resonate now, like we've talked about. And I think that's what it means for something to be a classic. A classic also doesn't mean that it was liked when it came out. I mean, this play, they wouldn't even let people put it on in Norway. It was first put on in Chicago because it was too offensive for people then. But it's a classic because it still has things to say that are relevant for all times, and that's a testament to the writing. And I think that getting to work on a classic makes us remember what's kind of fundamental to the human experience and what doesn't change even in 100 years about what it means to be a person. Yeah.